Sores would develop in their hair. Their hair would fall out. They would have bald patches in their hair. So what she did with these chemicals that she learned to use and the herbs that she learned to use was develop formulas that would grow hair back, would sometimes be able to actually uh, correct the sores that people had in the hair. So the do rags that you saw in many pictures of a while, let's say earlier in our century, was to cover up the difficulty women had with their hair, because women were always concerned about beautifying themselves. Well, Annie Malone felt that when you groomed yourself, cleaned yourself, you presented your best self. And that was one of the things that she tried to share with women of that particular time. Her sister, Ada, did not really agree with her desire to help women with their hair and discouraged her from becoming a person that only used hair as a profession for um, her livelihood. Well, in 1900, she left and went to Lovejoy. And she went with her younger sister, Laura. And she and Laura used to walk the streets of Lovejoy, Illinois, looking at who had laundry, how much laundry, talking to women, and offering free demonstrations of the products that she created. When they were in Lovejoy, they rented a one-room shack, actually, that cost $5 a month. And by day, they walked the neighborhood and learned who they could use as demonstrators. And by night, they made their formula. It became so popular, and word of mouth was um, something that was basically their only advertising tool, because people of color were not involved in the traditional marketing and advertising that took place in that time. So she made use of word of mouth, and it was so great that in 1902, learning about the World's Fair in St. Louis, she and Laura decided to move to St. Louis, Missouri. That was her first business move, her first corporate move. So she was in Lovejoy, then she moved to St. Louis, Missouri. Unfortunately, the World's Fair did not take place in 1902. It was postponed for 2 years and did not take place until 1904. In the interim, um, she and Laura decided to do some different things. One was for Annie Malone to take a trip south and try to still cultivate um, a relationship with women of color and teach them about her hair care products. I think that trip taught her more than one would imagine. I think more than she even imagined, because she changed entirely her marketing plans. She came back to St. Louis, immediately informed the African American press, and basically said, I'm going to start a school and I'm going to teach women what I know about this particular product and encourage them to um, be business owners for themselves. So that's exactly what she did. The Black press did not at that particular time think very much of her announcement. They didn't believe what she had to offer, but Annie Malone struck out and blazed that trail and actually did start a school in her very first building here in St. Louis. She was on Market Street. She was there for about 5 or 10 years, and she moved to an even larger location on Pine Street here in St. Louis and continued to grow her business. She found that legions of women were very interested in learning about themselves, really, learning about the opportunity that she offered them to be their own bosses, to provide for their own families, to be something other than the traditional washerwoman or domestic worker working in someone else's home. So it provided them great opportunity that was very different from anything that they knew. The other thing that was very interesting about the enterprise that Annie Malone offered was she offered jobs beyond what most people of color could have, in terms of women working in the office, women working in a reception kind of situation, or as a telephone operator. There were so many other jobs associated with the schools that she opened. She was the very first woman to open a chain of schools across the country. In fact, There were at least 32 schools that she had across the United States, and she had supply stations in other parts of the country as well. And eventually, which is something most people don't know, became an international operator. She had Poro agents in every part of the United States and many countries across the world, Africa, Nova Scotia, Haiti, just all different parts of our United States and internationally across the world. So Annie Malone was one who was very forward thinking. She provided opportunities and looked for the excellence always in what she did. Um, Part of her desire to provide excellence to people here in St. Louis was the building of her fourth expansion. And Sarah's going to show you a picture of the building that she built from the ground up. It was the largest undertaking that a person of color had done at that particular time. In fact, it was in 1918 that she built this complex that you see before you. It was a magnificent building. It had just about everything you could possibly imagine in it to offer to not only her students, the school was there, but she had meeting rooms. She had an auditorium. In fact, the auditorium sat 800 people. There were restaurants, an ice cream parlor, and a restaurant that not only did the people in her building who were employees use, but people in the community used. In that building, which was her fourth business expansion, the only one to my knowledge that she built from the ground up, employed about 175 people in jobs, as I said before, that were non-traditional for people of color at that particular time. It was very interesting also that Annie Malone built that building when the city of St. Louis basically said people of color could not own property anywhere. When the federal government stepped in and said you can't deny people the opportunity to own a building, Annie Malone brought lots of property to make that building so, and she brought property outside of that as well for employees and the possibility for expansion. It was interesting that that building was opened in 1918, which was right in the beginning of the Spanish flu pandemic. It was at a time when people of color really had very limited possibilities for employment and resources. So it's amazing as you think about and look at this particular building that a person of color would be able to navigate the sexism, the racism, the discrimination that happened and offer people such opportunities as she did. One of the things that was also interesting about her is that not only did she teach her students about hair care and beauty, because she first had hair care products and then she went on to have beauty products, but she basically insisted that they carry themselves in a particular way. They always used her products, which of course made the business grow even more. And she was a real stickler for excellence. It was interesting that she would dispatch photographers all over the United States to take pictures of and do stories about the excellence of people of color. She'd bring them back and she'd show them in St. Louis. She'd show them in other places that she traveled. She traveled quite a bit and offered her Poro agents an opportunity to do that as well. She would often have an annual event to congratulate her Poro agents and provide them with lavish gifts. For example, if you were in her employ for a 5-year period, she would give you a diamond ring to celebrate that. If you were a person who was actively saving and trying to buy property, she'd add to the dollars that you had in your bank account. If you're trying to buy a house for your parents, or she'd try and learn about what you were doing and support whatever it was that you were doing. So it was interesting to me as well to find out that Annie Malone was one who was such a philanthropic personality that the newspapers called her a giving freak at one point. She supported hospitals, she supported events, she supported the employees generously on a regular basis. She supported 2 scholarships for young people in African American land grant colleges in the South for many years. They were full ride scholarships. And a lot of people thought that she was too generous, but she believed in philanthropy and encouraged her Poro agents to do the same. She said, don't just be a beautician or a hair and beauty culturist. Be a part of your community, contribute to your community, find out what's going on in your community and be a part of what that is. One of the other philanthropic things done was that in 1927 here in St. Louis, a horrible tornado came and tore up the north side of the city. And Annie Malone opened the doors to the Poro College there in the Ville. And for about 5,000 people, with the assistance of the St. Louis Red Cross, she provided assistance to that neighborhood. She was here in she was here until 1930, in fact, and went to her 5th business location, actually, which was Chicago. I'd like to back up a little bit and ask Sarah to provide an example of the general office that was used. It was a very large complex and said to be one of the largest and best representations of something that an African-American person did. You see there the ladies all uniformed. She believed in having people identified as a group, and she had the sewing department in the Poro College to make uniforms for her staff. You can go on and take a look at the shipping office, which was no small thing. You can see here that she shipped out lots of product all over the world. There were 2 mailings a day that provided very large shipments. There was a very large truck that provided back and forth to the post office. You can see here on the next photo that I have for you, the auditorium that I talk about. She had receptions and recitals and concerts. She believed in bringing to St. Louis, to the St. Louis community, the best that there was to offer. People were not necessarily welcome downtown in the concert halls and hotels that were here in St. Louis at that particular time. So when she built this 4th expansion, she built it with her community in mind and provided them with places for entertainment. You see in the very top picture that there is a booth in the back there. That was a phone booth that was open and available to the public. And I have had many people tell me stories about them coming to that particular place to keep in touch with their loved ones long distance. You will also find, Sarah has a beautiful picture, one of my favorites, of the rooftop garden. She had graduations there, and again, concerts and weddings at the rooftop garden. Well, you missed that one. There we go. That's the rooftop garden. I have not seen anything like that ever in my life. But the photos are all that we have, because that building, the Poro College building that she built, no longer stands in Missouri. It was torn down in the early to mid 60s. for a different project. It currently is the location for the St. James House. She was here in St. Louis until 1930. She moved to Chicago and started her empire all over again. She bought 4 mansions in a row and continued to do her business. When she left here, she left as a result of an ugly marriage. Basically, they settled out of court, gave her husband $200,000 and a bit more property, and told him goodbye because the gentleman wanted to have half of her business, and that just didn't work. So he accepted the $200,000 and went away. Bottom line is Annie Malone was a force to be reckoned with. She was, in fact, the teacher of Madam C.J. Walker. So many people think that Madam C.J. Walker was the first and only. She was not. Annie Malone employed her and sent her to Colorado to be a Poro agent, actually. And she started from there. So that's a really quick and dirty kind of idea about who she was and what kind of things she did. But she had Poro clubs, and she had an impact on our world that was much larger than what we know about today. She was a patron of the arts, and you see her with the harp and the piano there in the background. She provided a lot of opportunities to a lot of people, not just because of her belief in herself, but she managed to teach other people that they could believe in themselves and do the same thing. So if you got any questions for me, I would love to hear what you might want to know.
All right, let's see here. One of the first questions is, what do you think Annie's reaction would have been of her representation in the Self-Made series by Netflix?
I think she would not have been very happy about it. I think she would be disgusted that the only thing that people want to know is, was there a rivalry? Not looking at the fact that both of these women managed to have a disagreement, but not let that disagreement stop them from teaching thousands of people, because Annie Malone had about 75,000 representatives across the world in her lifetime. And I'm sure Madam C.J. Walker had many as well. And I think she would be quite disappointed in that, because people did not focus on the good things that each of them were able to do.
Another question is, do you know why Annie Malone was excluded from our Black history, and why is it important today?
My gut reaction is, it's not important that she was excluded. It's very important that we are including her now. I think because she had some financial difficulty, a lot of people think negatively of who she was. I don't think you can take away what she accomplished in her lifetime simply because her fortune dwindled. She had some very ugly financial difficulty with lawsuits that happened, challenges to her business that happened, tax problems that she had. But in all of that, she continued to move forward. She continued to be a wonderful example to people. And I think the fact that we are elevating her memory now is very important. And I pray that we never let it become so obscure again.
So we have a couple of questions about the Historical Society. So one is, what is the Annie Malone Society? And then what are they doing to get more attention brought to her?
Well, the Annie Malone Historical Society is one that is interested in providing information about Annie Malone in one place where you can get a round picture of who that lady was. When I started doing research for a magazine article that I was writing for the Missouri History Museum, I found only little slips of paper in our libraries here in St. Louis and was very dissatisfied with that. There's no way a woman can spend from 1900 to 1930 in a place, be so giving, and contribute so much to not just St. Louis, the state of Missouri, or the world for that matter. And you have that little bit of information. So what I started doing is pulling together pieces of information about her, trying to deposit it in one place. We are a website presence at this particular point. We are not a physical thing. We give lectures, we give presentations, not just in St. Louis, but in other parts of the country as well, to students, to universities. We've been in classes, teaching classes. We've done presentations in lots of different places. And at this particular point, we have the privilege of being a guest exhibitor at the Fieldhouse Museum here in St. Louis. We have a museum exhibit talking about the wonderful things Annie Malone has done in terms of her impact on the economy, her impact on the community, and in philanthropic endeavors. She's done a number of different things, and we're there until June and are showing people exactly what it is she's been about.
All right, let's see. Another question is, one of her names was Minerva. Is that another part of the beauty industry connection?
Her name was Annie Minerva Turnbo Malone. She was married twice. Pope was the first husband. Malone was the second. The beauty products that she had both hair care products and beauty products, skin and deodorants and things of that, perfumes, things of that sort. As far as I know, there was never any specific product named Minerva.
Do you know anything about her family that lived in Metropolis, like what they did or like how her parents died?
Do not know how her parents died. I know that mother died first, father died after. He had been in the Union Army, but did survive that and come back to Metropolis. In fact, father and mother were initially from Kentucky. When he went into the Army, mother and the children that she had at that time moved to Metropolis. She had a brother who was a brick maker, for lack of a better word. He was also in the Metropolis area. I don't know what all the other children did, but she was very instrumental in educating her family. She had no children ever, purchasing homes for them, employing them in many situations throughout her career. She died in 1957, May the 10th, 1957, of a stroke, and was a very giving person, a very Christian person, believed heavily in God's presence and his direction that she was trying always to follow.
Another question is, did she have any supporters or partners who were not African American? From whom did she get her confidence and strong sense of self?
I would say she got her strong sense of self from her family. As I said, she was the 10th of 11 children, and they were instrumental in raising her. I believe she got a lot of that from her brother, who was in the brick business, and her sister, who lived there in Peoria. As far as any other backers that were not of African descent, that I really don't know.
Does she have any living relatives, and what were her parents' names?
Parents' names were Robert and Isabel Turnbo. She does have living relatives, but I learned from reading her obituary that she survived all of her living brothers and sisters and left the business just before her death to her nieces and nephews. I have had the privilege of meeting 4 of her great nieces or nephews. In fact, I introduced them to one another. They did not know one another. And I can say that is one of the privileges of doing a lot of digging. You find things that help other people. And I was very proud to have introduced them to one another.
Can you share any history of the Annie Malone parade? This person has very fond memories of it.
I can, as I do as well. I marched in the parade as a brownie when I was a little bitty person. In fact, I was employed by the Annie Malone Children and Family Service Center for a time, and am very proud to say that the Annie Malone Parade is the second largest and oldest African American parade celebration in the country. It is the only thing that I know of that continues beside the children's home, because that was one of Annie Malone's greatest endeavors in terms of donating her time and her property to. She donated $10,000 in property to help that building that stands today. And she put a lot of her other energy and time into the leadership of that particular facility. And they hold that parade in honor of her today. It helps to raise money for the operation of the children's home. And it was something near and dear to her heart. It was also one of the opportunities for people of St. Louis, particularly colored folks of St. Louis, to gather and show the excellence that they had, because it was a very large part of our community and is today.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting questions as they come in order. Is it possible that because Miss Malone was an extremely successful African-American female entrepreneur caused her to face undue, unwarranted scrutiny?
I would definitely say yes. I question, as I've continued to research, and I've not found the necessary documentation to say this boldly, but I can say from my research, I wonder if some of her tax difficulty was undue scrutiny that she experienced when she was in Chicago. There was not, when she lived in St. Louis, an excise tax on luxury items. That did occur after her move to Chicago. And there was a lot of accusation as to whether or not she was treated fairly. In fact, there was a committee of people who worked together to try to save the Poro industry when she was in Chicago. And there was the intervention of Eleanor Roosevelt, who asked the Internal Revenue Service to give her more time to pay her debt.
Can you share a little bit about Edna Smith? She was one of Annie's students, if you know anything about her.
I can. I had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Smith when she was 98 years old. And I learned that she was one of the oldest Poro graduates that we knew of. I think she is the oldest one in the St. Louis community. She turned 100 years old as of September 3rd of 2020. And as recent as March the 7th, she was at the museum that we had. We had a special gathering of people to dedicate that space, and she was there. She graduated from Poro College in 1960. She is a contributor to many of the artifacts that we have for the museum exhibit. She shared her graduation portrait, her graduation announcement, many other things that she contributed to the museum exhibit and our collection of items, of artifacts. She is a very positive woman, very articulate at her age, and has supported many of the things that we've done. I appreciate her with more words than I have.
So this question, I think I'll be able to answer. It was, did Annie Malone kick off this series for a specific reason? No particular reason. She was just a fascinating, interesting person that one of our curators started learning more about. And we thought it would be interesting to do part of the series on her, just for the reason that people might not know who she was, or maybe have heard of her, but not quite sure what her part in history was. So it's kind of our reasoning behind it. And that kind of brought us to you and the Historical Society. So we'll move on to another question about her. If she gave the business to her relatives just before she died, does that mean it was still operating in the 1950s? And when did it go out of business?
It was operating in the 1950s. She had dwindled a lot of her business when she turned it over to her relatives. It operated until the mid 60s, actually. It was a lot of mail order things. She started off with a lot of mail order kind of exchanges, and closer to the end of her life, or should I say just after her life ended, her family ran it for a while, and then it just dwindled down to orders only, where you could make a request for order and have things sent to you.
So someone has asked how she was able to purchase property during that time, as they thought that African Americans were prohibited from doing so.
As late as 1916, the city of St. Louis said no, African Americans could not purchase property. And then they decided, when the Supreme Court said you can't not have them do that, they designated the Ville neighborhood, which was called at first Ellardsville, in a distant part of the city at that particular point. They said you could purchase property in Ellardsville, and Annie Malone purchased quite a lot of property, and in 1917 broke ground to build that building. I think one of the things that upset her most was a riot in East St. Louis, where people were fleeing across the bridge coming into St. Louis because there was such rioting there. There was a lot of controversy over jobs in East St. Louis at that particular point, and there ensued a riot that went on for a 24-hour period, and people were getting out as quickly as they could get out. And Annie Malone was very disturbed by that, and was at that particular point building a building, and she made sure that that building was a resource to the community. It wasn't just a college, it was a resource to the community that welcomed them for meetings, welcomed them for cotillions and recitals, all kinds of different things, and encouraged them to be the best they could be. There was even 2 hospital suites there, because there were not places for people of color to get medical attention even.
All right, so we have time for one more question. Does she have any legacy businesses or products that perhaps her heirs were involved in?
Legacy businesses, not to my knowledge. I know that she has a niece, a great niece, that is interested in trying to produce products. But at this particular point, I don't think that is a reality. She has an interest in it. I know that a great nephew has written a book that provides information about Annie Malone. And we have, the Annie Malone Historical Society has republished a book that was originally printed in 1926 that shows the beautiful building that we were talking about. It shows the insides of that building with the ice cream parlor and the auditorium and different offices. And that is a book we're using as a fundraiser, and that's available through our website, and much more information. I am very proud to say that we've been contacted by people in foreign countries and throughout the United States who've asked for information about Annie Malone, students and teachers and clergy people who are constantly interested in her story. And we are there to provide them information and provide the kind of learning that so many people are interested in.
Well, thank you very much, Linda, for tonight. This was very fun, and a lot of people seem to have enjoyed it. And we thank you all for joining us for tonight. I'm putting the Historical Society's website in the chat, so feel free to check them out. They've got a lot of great information there. Our next program is on April 27th, also 6:30 to 7. It's all about the Radium Girls of Ottawa. And you can find more information on that program on our website. And tonight's program was recorded, and it will be posted to our YouTube video later, or YouTube page later this week. So you can go back and take a listen if you'd like. And thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at a future program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.